Hi. Okay, sorry about that, folks. We had a little tiny bit of trouble. Looks like we're all in there. Looks like you can hear me. Someone just say one thing that you can hear me, and we're good to go. I hope you can hear me. Lewis, sorry it wouldn't let you in. That's not good. Karen, it was kind of a subtle way to create a call to action. So I'm going to assume the audio is good. Can anyone sort of confirm for me real quick? And then I am going to get started. And again, this is just a 20-minute one, so we're good to go. Okay, so let's jump in. Hello, again, I'm Dean Way, as you might know, might not. I write what other people say and show to their live audiences. That includes ghostwriting other people's webinars. All through June, I've been doing new behind-the-scenes webinars about how to make webinars at a pro level. I started with how to open it. Then I did one about getting and keeping audience attention. And today I'm going to show you how I write the end, the pitch, the call to action, also known as the CTA. You don't need to have seen the other two to understand everything I'm going to say in this one. So here's the problem with the call to action and me trying to do a webinar about it. People hate this topic. Everyone thinks this is the broccoli of webinar creation. It's not broccoli. It's you writing a detective story for your audience. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the easiest way you've ever seen. Just stay with me for a few minutes and you're going to be impressed with yourself. This is, I have to warn you, the easiest part of a webinar to do badly, but it's the most lucrative part if you do it well. Webinars are, or should be, the most labor-intensive type of presentation you create because they give you a chance to make every piece of the audience's experience as useful, as interesting, and as valuable for them as possible. Webinars are the type of live event where you, the creator, has the most control over making sure the audience is well served. Let's start with the single biggest difference between how everyone else creates a webinar or presentation or speech and how you and I do it. Me right now and you 20 minutes from now when this thing's over and you've got all of this new information. Everyone else either constructs the presentation in the order that they'll show it, like opening, middle, and call to action, or they construct the middle first. It's very common because they already have those slides. Then they make the beginning and then the call to action, if they even specify a call to action. I have to start at the end and work backwards. When I write a webinar for someone, the process always starts with two questions. What can you tell me about your audience and what's your call to action? By the way, if you're thinking my call to action is just to download a PDF or join an email list, it's not that big a deal. It doesn't need to be the focus of what I'm doing here. You need to look down the pathway a little bit. The call to action is the key ultimately to something bigger, a new customer, new supporter, a new job for you maybe. I bet the number of webinars that you've watched, the number that you remembered 2 hours after they ended, never mind 2 days or 2 years, that number of memorable webinars is zero or very, very close to zero. That person or that company had the chance to live in your head rent-free and didn't accomplish that. You can accomplish that. And understanding the CTA's role in being memorable has a lot to do with your webinar success. So since we're doing a tutorial, let's start with the first lesson. If you don't know your call to action yet, don't start writing your presentation. Just because you know what you want to say doesn't mean you know how to say it or when to say it. The call to action is the foundation of your webinar. You don't build a house by starting with the roof and moving down. You start with the foundation and build up. A webinar's foundation is its call to action. Lucky for us, working out your call to action isn't so hard. You're looking for answers to just 3 questions. Answer those and you'll know what to offer and how to offer it. First question, what's their unresolved problem? If the audience didn't have a problem, they wouldn't watch a webinar. What's the smallest concrete single problem that you can help solve in your webinar? Once you answered that, and what's their unresolved problem, ask what they need to do right now to solve their unresolved problem. And finally, if they achieve the outcome, what will their positive future look like or feel like? What desire are you fulfilling here? Now, in B2B especially, we don't usually talk about desires except in marketing, but webinars and really all online presentations are experienced individually. People don't group up in front of a big screen to watch a webinar. Probably everyone listening to me right now is alone, a big collection of individuals. And every time your audience member is alone, desire plays a role in whether they register, join, stay, or perform the call to action. So you should know ahead of time what desire is being fulfilled with your webinar. For this tutorial, the desire is You want to know how to create webinars that produce results, and especially how to end your webinar in a way that produces those results. Can you know how to do that by watching this session? Yeah. Oh, and for everyone who says, Dean, we don't need to have a call to action for our webinar. It's a thought leadership webinar. Well, to that, I call bullshit, because thought leadership webinars have a default call to action. It's remember us when the time comes. How is that anything other than a call to action? And a very close cousin to a thought leadership webinar is an instructional webinar like this one. And the default call to action is nearly identical, except instead of remember us when the time comes, it's remember this information when the time comes. Every webinar has a call to action, even if it's just the default one. But nobody ever created change by sliding by with a default call to action. And every webinar's job is to create change. Now, since there's always a call to action and we're the kind of people who figure it out first and then build our webinar, what do we need to know about making it and then moving people toward it? Here's the next lesson. Your CTA fills a gap that you opened up earlier in your presentation. So the process is decide on the gap, the problem that the audience has, widen it, and then fill it with your call to action. If you don't do that, here's what your audience attention looks like. We'll follow the people who joined a little early, your pre-audience from start to end. They join here on the left, and within a few minutes after you kick off your talk, some of them will either lose interest and ignore you or exit altogether. They decided it wasn't interesting, or they decided it wasn't as important or urgent or whatever compared to what they're dealing with outside the webinar. You didn't open a gap. The next big attention drop is here in the middle. If you use the old structure, you had an intro section, then a content section. And to the audience, the content section is their part of the webinar. It's why they registered. That's why they showed up. So when it stops and you pivot into Act 3 and start talking about your pitch, where your call to action lives, they stop paying attention. Then there's another drop when you pivot into the question period. A lot of people, if they don't have a question, will drop as soon as the first question is asked. They've experienced enough boring, useless question periods in their lives. Thank you very much. So right here, unless your content or your call to action pathway widen the gap your CTA then fills, you just get that massive drop off in attention and even a massive drop off in attendance as you pivot into your call to action. You can't spend 30 minutes educating people about something technical or about boosting employee engagement or the importance of contracts and business topics or whatever your topic is, and then hard pivot into something soft like, you should talk to our sales team. Here's how to get in touch with us. Or to book a demo, go to this page or call this number or whatever, right? No, you didn't widen the gap, and your CTA will, that your CTA will fill. So it all just crumbles. You're doing the webinar to solve their problem. If you fumble or ignore the call to action, you didn't solve the problem, you informed them. And if getting more information was the only thing people needed to solve problems, none of us would have any problems. We have the internet all day long. We have information. Okay, you figured out their problem and what the positive future looks like for them, and then you needed to show or widen the gap between the problem today and the positive future. So how do you widen the gap that your CTA then fills, right? We know we need to widen it. We know we need to create it. How do we make it more pressing? The way to make it more pressing is you spend time pressing on one or more of these concepts. In B2B webinars, there are 7 go-to concepts for highlighting the difference between where a person or company is now versus where they want to be. So these are others know or have something you don't. If you just had X, things would be better. The threat is real. Others have had all the breaks. You didn't miss the opportunity. You don't need permission, and there's an easier way. Now, if you saw the last tutorial about how to construct the first 5 minutes of your webinar, I talked about, and I'm going to show it in a second, I talked about opening with the attention commander statement or slide. And I said that you could rely on myth, assumption, or contra statements to grab the audience's attention. And I showed this slide using milk as a silly example of each opener. Now, do you see what's happening with all of these openers? We're creating a gap. You used to know something or think something or believe something, and it's no longer true, or it has changed, or it's about to change, or something's going to happen. And when we create a gap with this kind of opener, we're then implicitly making a promise to our audience. And that promise is, I'll close this gap for you. It's the same with your call to action. If your CTA doesn't close a gap for them, one that you widened or one that the audience is already dealing with, then why the heck do they need you? So now you know how to create and widen the gap. Those are the 7 things you want to look at. And now you want to, so now you use your opening statement and one or more of those 7 concepts. Let's take a minute to get into what your CTA can be. What can you ask for from an audience? The old theory was that the size of your call to action was directly proportional to the number of touches you had with an audience member. If the webinar was likely the first time they'd spent any time with you, you could only ask for something small like an email sign up or a PDF download. I'm talking about B2B webinars here, not B2C. Those have different rules. Anyway, only asking for something small if you were new to the audience made sense in B2B, because in B2B, you're aiming for one single thing, right? You're trying to move your company and the audience member's company closer together. It's a long game. Plus, under the old formula where all you had was introduction, content, and pitch, you were limited with your CTA. And you didn't know how to widen the gap. You didn't have a CTA pathway. So you could only have a small call to action, or you had to invest in making your call to action as attractive as possible to justify the bigger commitment from the audience member. In the new formula, where you know you need to widen the gap and you're going to build a CTA pathway, which we haven't discussed yet, but it's coming up, you have more options. If the webinar is at the top of a funnel or at the beginning of a flywheel, a small call to action is still the best idea. But if most of the audience already knows you a bit, your options open up fast. By the way, this is why doing a webinar series is so great. You can include larger and larger call to actions the later in the webinar series you go. But even without a series, if the audience already knows you, even a little, you can create a bigger call to action as long as you credibly create a big enough gap and then strengthen your message with a call to action pathway. And there's even a scenario where the exception proves the rule. If the rule is to keep your CTA small, the exception is to invert that and go for something big. You keep it small when you want the largest possible number of people to buy in. You go big when you want people to self-select and self-exclude. So the ones you're left with are the ones that are most committed to the idea. I'll show you a go big example at the end of this tutorial as my call to action. It's a time commitment for an audience member and a huge free giveaway on my part. No money involved at all. But anyway, you'll see the exception that proves the rule in a few minutes. Oh, and earlier I said B2C webinars have different rules for the call to action than B2B ones. So if you're doing B2C webinars, this mainly has to do with 2 factors. In B2C, and B2C in webinars just means the audience member can make a purchase on the spot. They can pull out a credit card and complete a transaction, even if they're really a business customer. In B2C, you can do a webinar that's 90 minutes long, or 2 hours, or even 2.5 hours. In B2B, you get 30 minutes or 60. That's it. So in B2C, you have time to build rapport and also to wear people down. The other way B2C webinars are different is that they have access to scarcity. Scarcity is a whole other topic, but for the most part, B2C can use scarcity and B2B can't. This discount only lasts until the webinar is over, or we have a limited number of seats available and then they'll be gone forever. You can say that kind of stuff in a B2C webinar, but not in a B2B webinar. Again, remember, it's B2B if the audience member needs someone else to approve a purchase. It's B2C, no matter who the audience member is, if they can make the purchase decision all by themselves. Okay, you figured out a call to action that you want to provide to the audience because you answered the 3 questions about what the problem is and what the future could look like and what you can offer. You know that there's always a call to action, a default one, even if you skip the step of making one, but that's a terrible approach. And you know you need to create or identify a gap and then widen it so your call to action can fill it. You did all that and something's wrong. Your CTA still isn't working. Here are the top 3 reasons your call to action isn't working. Let's see what else. 1, it's not smooth enough. The audience doesn't care enough about you, to do any kind of work. You need to do everything for them. If there's a PDF download, everything should happen with 1 click. If you want a discovery call, they should be able to see your available slots instantly. Drive out the friction. Have volunteers go through the process to ensure it's as easy as possible. The audience wants the sauce drizzled on. They will not dip the food into the sauce themselves. So if your PDF download page is asking 7 questions and wants to know their phone number or job title or asks if they want your sales department to call them, you're missing the point about smooth. Second possibility, it's not safe enough. It doesn't feel safe enough to them. If you're asking them to commit to anything, even 15 minutes for a call, you need to overwhelm their fear that they'll be sucked into something, or that they'll need to justify it later, or that you're going to try high pressure sales tactics on them. Now, if your CTA was smooth and it was safe enough and it's still not working, then that gets us to number 3, which I've used for the unsexiest slide ever done. It's not sexy enough. If I don't care about your call to action, it doesn't matter if it's easy to get it or safe, because I don't care. And if I don't care, if I'm not even curious, then you didn't open a wide enough gap and made a powerful enough promise about how your CTA fills that gap. Go back to that list of reasons, the 7 reasons I gave about people why they're going to care, and push on something a little harder. Your CTA will start looking more attractive as you widen that gap even more. Now, where are we? Understand that you need to pick a call to action, then create your webinar. And you need to understand that the webinar content creates a gap that the CTA will fill. And you understand that the CTA needs to be safe enough and smooth enough and sexy enough. At this point, you've already watched, you're already ahead of nearly every webinar I watch, and I watch a buttload of webinars every year. You're opening a gap that's filled with your easy to get, safe to get, and worth getting CTA, right? So the final component is building a pathway to your call to action, so that by the time your audience is exposed to your call to action, acting on it is the natural, reasonable thing to do. This is what puts you into the 1% club of webinars. To get to that level, we need to talk about one of the audience attention techniques that I teach. It's called the call forward. And it has a call to action cousin, which is the assumptive aside. A call forward, if you're a webinar ghostwriter, is an explicit promise to your audience that if they open up a little loop in their brain, you'll close it later in a satisfying way. If you listen to the replay of this webinar, you'll notice that I use call forwards a lot. They're super useful. They do multiple jobs. Anytime I say I'm going to explain something or show you something in a few minutes, that's me telling you to open up a loop so you're ready for me when I get to it. This text on the screen right now, I spoke those words a few moments ago, and they're a type of call forward. To get you up to that level, we need to talk about an audience attention element, the call forward, so that I can show you its CTA cousin, the assumptive aside. So I use these everywhere. You should use them. They fulfill a bunch of different promises you make to your audience explicitly and implicitly, including this one on screen right now. Your time and attention are in good hands. I know what I'm doing. I know my material. I know what I'm talking about. You say that you're going to talk about something, or you say that you're going to show something or do something, then the audience waits a little bit, then you fulfill your promise. It's very satisfying. Audiences might not even notice you doing call forwards, but in surveys after the webinars, they have a higher opinion of the presenter and the material, even if they were already familiar with them. So that's call forwards. I said I needed to tell you what they were so I could tell you about their fun little cousin, the assumptive aside, and now we're at that point. Once you get assumptive asides, your webinar game, your presentation game, your sales presentation game, you level up immediately. Here's how they're done, and you've probably never seen this explained before now. You picked your call to action, then you created your content, and you opened up a gap that was big enough, and you made a call to action that was smooth enough and safe enough and sexy enough, but the audience hasn't seen it yet. They won't be exposed to it until the final part of your webinar. So now you go all the way back to the beginning of your presentation, even as far back as the pre-audience story I talked about in the last tutorial about how to make the first 5 minutes of your webinar. You've gone all the way back to the start of your webinar, and now you write an aside that assumes the audience agrees that your call to action is worthwhile for someone like them. You're going to write several of these and put them throughout your webinar. In a webinar, an aside is a throwaway line. Nothing really leads up to it. Nothing follows it. It's a tiny, tiny little commentary about the fact or story or diagram that the audience just experienced. And you know that this throwaway line is part of the call to action that they're going to see later, but they don't know that yet. Here's an example. Let's say you sell market intelligence data to companies. Your call to action is a newsletter about the latest events in the industry. You want your audience to enroll. And your story for the people who showed up early and waited was a story about the founders in a meeting with a potential customer, early days of the company. And at one point in their presentation, they said they only had one real competitor in America, and their company was a little bigger and even a little better funded than the competitor. But then someone in their audience interrupted and said Microsoft had just purchased that competitor. And that made the meeting awkward. And then you toss out a throwaway line. Back then, salespeople at small companies would have awkward moments like that from time to time. And that's it. That's the entire assumptive aside. Back then, salespeople at small companies would have an awkward moment like that from time to time. You didn't tell them later that you're going to pitch a newsletter. You didn't start your story by saying, here's an example of how our newsletter would have saved some embarrassment from our founders. You didn't lead up to the aside, and you won't follow up on it either. It's a throwaway line. Your next sentence will be whatever the regular next sentence in your valuable content presentation would have always been. Live audiences experience your words as an unstoppable, unrewindable stream of information. They only remember the most memorable bits of it. They don't remember casual throwaway lines. They don't see the pathway you make with throwaway lines. So you write a handful of assumptive asides and you insert them in places where they fit. By the time you make your pitch, the audience has been informed by those lines about the value of your call to action without you being explicit or crass or salesy about any of it. If they remember those lines at all, they come away with a feeling that you were persuaded by something's value. And persuaded people are persuasive people. So that the unspoken message you convey when you finally show your call to action is this: people like us believe things like this, or people like us do things like this. And that's it. We went over how to choose and build a CTA, how to open with a tension and curiosity-based opener, how to widen the gap between that tension and the positive future with one of 7 messages that widen the gap, how to ensure you don't sabotage your CTA because it isn't easy or attractive or safe enough, and how to use assumptive asides to create a pathway from the top of your webinar presentation to the end. I have one last thing to share with you. I've never told this to anyone except clients. It's how to boost the percentage of people who respond to your call to action by not letting them respond to it right away, and by pitching the call to action to people who registered but didn't attend. Here's your real life education and how that works. In the next 24 hours, everyone who registered for this webinar will get an email, and that email has links and lots of free stuff like my emails always do. But this time there's more, because this time I'm offering a call to action that requires a time investment. No money, just time. I'm going to do my webinar workshop for free. First time. You show up on a Zoom session, and together in a group in real time, we build your best ever draft of a speech, presentation, or ideally webinar. People who've done this workshop have ended up giving the best live performance of their lives at events around the globe. I have the thank you emails to prove it. It takes 3 hours. We walk through the questions I show here and explain the audience accelerators and the call to action pathway in detail. Of course, there's a catch. The paid version of the workshop includes private one-to-one writing sessions with me and private one-to-one rehearsal sessions with an acting coach. Those aren't included in this opportunity. But you can create those one-to-one events by watching the videos I'm going to send you and looking at the PDFs I'm going to send you in the email. Oh, and one more catch. There's a limited number of spots, obviously. It'll be first come, first happy. I'm also including a separate offer, one that hundreds of clients have already enjoyed. So keep an eye out in your email for that. If you don't see it in the next 24 hours, check your spam folder. It's in there. And that's it. Now, as we slide into questions, if there are any questions, once again, I'm alone, so I can't look at the questions until I finish talking. But there's one question I do get a lot, and I'm going to tackle it up front because people will tell me that they really can't think of a call to action that their audience will want or even crave. So let me tell you about a time that I was an idiot. I once tried to offer my services by talking about the benefits of having a professionally written webinar, and it wasn't working very well. It turned out that, like a lot of us, maybe even you, what I thought I was selling and what clients were actually buying were different things. In my case, my existing clients didn't buy my services writing webinars and sales presentations and whatever by itself. They were buying that under the umbrella of project management that I was providing without even thinking about it. these days in every email and LinkedIn headline and whatever, I make a point up front of showing my PMP certification. I've been internationally certified working project manager for about 15 years. I didn't even think about that. But the clients were looking for a webinar where they didn't have to worry about managing anything. They wanted to place an order, send over the info, and know that they wouldn't have to micromanage me. I was selling webinar writing. They were buying a set it and forget it webinar project. So that's my answer. If you really can't seem to come up with a call to action that you think your audience would really want, stop. Spend some time figuring out what your customers are actually buying from you, because it's probably not what you think they sell. Okay, let's see if there are any more questions. And otherwise, I think we're done. You can go finish the rest of your lunch period. Let's see. Oh, I think we're gone. I'll wait one more moment just in case there are any questions. But other than that, I think we are finished. Okay, so just a quick reminder what's going to happen. You're going to get an email in the next 24 hours. It's going to have lots of links. It's going to have stuff from all 3 June webinars in this whole series that I put together for you. And keep an eye out for it. A lot of this time, of course, a lot of the stuff goes into spam. There's nothing I can do about that. Google especially has gotten a lot tighter in the last several weeks about making sure that people aren't bothered by stuff they didn't intend to see. So keep an eye out for it, but it is coming. Yeah, like always, there will be, someone did ask a question. Yes, there will be a replay. There's always a replay. I don't like the format that my webinar hosting uses, which makes you like watch the whole thing. So I'm going to download it. I usually cut it up a bit and then make it just easier to read, easier to watch. So you don't have to, you can fast forward, you can play it at a faster speed. I think I talk pretty fast, but some people like to hear it even faster. So all of that stuff will be available. I'm not going to lock anyone into watching it as if it's a real live webinar again, when obviously it's a recording. Okay, I think that was the last question. Oh, what are the dates? What are the dates for the workshop? Karen, the way that the workshop will work is you'll have a link, and when you click through to the link, you can click a button. There's a short form to fill out, and then we're going to put together a group or groups that sort of make sense for people. So if some people are specifically aiming at giving a speech at a conference, they'll all be in one group. People are going to create webinars, they'll be in one group. And as much as possible, we'll make sure that it's as valuable for everyone as it can be, given the other people that are in their group. All right, I think we're done. Thank you, everyone. This was always a lot of fun. Keep an eye out for the email and all the links in the replay and the other stuff that I've got coming up for you. It'll be up there shortly. Have a good day. Bye. Enjoy your lunch.